True story from Georgia. My mom held a pillow over my face so I wouldn't scream while he touched me. The memory, stark and unyielding, still visits me, even now, decades later. It's not a hazy, ethereal wisp of the past, but a sharp, visceral punch to the gut, like the air being driven from my small lungs. The weight of the pillow, the stifling heat against my face, the muffled thud of my own frantic heart against the thin fabric, and beneath it all, the phantom touch, cold and invasive, the unbearable knowledge that he was there, doing unspeakable things, while she, my mother, Monica, held the pillow, silencing my terror, orchestrating my betrayal. This isn't a story of monsters lurking in shadows. It's a story of monsters woven into the fabric of daily life, of injustice perpetrated within the supposed safety of home, in the quiet, humid expanse of rural Georgia. It's the story of a child's betrayal by the two people who should have protected her most, and the long, arduous, utterly solitary journey to reclaim a voice that was stolen, to seek a justice that felt impossible, and ultimately, to find a profound and quiet empowerment that transcended the pain of the past. That day, stifled and helpless, I didn't scream, but a scream began to form deep inside me, a silent, furious roar that would take decades to find its release, and when it did, it would shatter more than just the silence. I was only 5 years old, perhaps 6, the first time it happened. The details are fragmented, like shards of broken glass, but the core sensation remains, the disorientation, the fear, the suffocating presence of Tyler, my mother's boyfriend, who had seemed so charming and jovial just hours before. He was a new fixture in our small 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Cincinnati, a lumbering man with a laugh that boomed too loudly and eyes that even then I found unsettling. Monica, my mother, was always drawn to charismatic men who filled a room, men who made her feel seen, even if it meant blinding herself to the shadows they cast. Tyler had swept into our lives like a summer storm, all bluster and promises, dazzling my mother with cheap gifts and grand pronouncements of a better life. I remember him bringing me a doll once, a porcelain-faced monstrosity with vacant eyes that I instinctively disliked. But my mother had insisted I show enthusiasm. "Say thank you, Margaret," she'd urged, her voice tight with expectation. Even then, the unspoken rules of our household were clear. Tyler's comfort, Tyler's mood, Tyler's desires superseded everything else, even a child's discomfort. The nights were when the house truly transformed. The daytime veneer of domesticity would peel away, replaced by an eerie quiet. My bed was pushed against the wall in my tiny room, beside my mother's, separated only by a thin, flimsy screen that offered no real privacy. I often heard them talking, their voices a low murmur, sometimes punctuated by Monica's forced laughter. But then, the laughter would cease, and a different kind of quiet would descend, a heavy, expectant silence that pressed in on me. I'd lie there, rigid, pretending to be asleep, my small body trembling. My internal monologue was a jumble of childish anxieties. Don't move, don't make a sound, pretend you're not there. And then the footsteps, Tyler's heavy tread, followed by the soft padding of my mother's bare feet. I'd squeeze my eyes shut, willing myself invisible. It was during these moments that the betrayal began to seep into my bones, a cold, creeping dread that my own protector was now an accomplice, a silent sentinel to my terror. The ritual was always the same. Tyler would slip into my bed, a hulking shadow against the dim light from the hallway. His breath, smelling of stale cigarettes and something cloyingly sweet, would hover over my face. And then, the pillow. Monica would press it down, gently at first, then with increasing pressure, over my nose and mouth. It wasn't enough to suffocate me entirely, but enough to ensure no sound, no gasp, no muffled cry could escape. The world would shrink to the confines of that stifling cotton, the frantic beat of my heart, and the sickening reality of his touch. I would fight, of course, a small, desperate flailing beneath the pillow, but my limbs were so small, so weak, my struggles easily contained by Monica's steady hands. Her grip, usually so tender when she braided my hair or held me when I scraped my knee, was unyielding, resolute in its cruel purpose. The injustice of it all, even as a child, was overwhelming. How could a mother, a source of comfort and safety, become a participant in such a horrific act? This wasn't protection, it was complicity. This wasn't love, it was a terrifying abandonment. This wasn't just a betrayal by Tyler. It was a deeper, more fundamental betrayal by Monica, the woman who had given me life. The suffocating feeling of the pillow was merely a physical manifestation of the emotional suffocation that enveloped my entire being. I learned, very quickly, that silence was my only option, my only defense. The world outside that pillow was a dangerous place, and the one person I should have trusted implicitly had become my deepest fear. The pattern of abuse continued, weaving itself into the very fabric of my childhood, a dark, unspoken secret that permeated our small home in Cincinnati, Georgia. Tyler's presence was a constant shadow, his moods dictating the emotional temperature of the house. One moment, he could be jovial, patting my head and calling me little princess, a saccharine term that always made my skin crawl. The next, his eyes would turn cold, a simmering anger just beneath the surface, triggered by the slightest perceived transgression, a toy left out, a dish not put away, a laugh too loud. Monica, my mother, was a master at navigating his tempestuous nature. She walked on eggshells, her every action calibrated to appease him, to keep the peace, and in doing so, she unwittingly reinforced his control, not just over her but over me. My internal monologue during those years was a constant strategic calculation. How can I be invisible? How can I avoid his notice? How can I make myself small enough to disappear? The abuse wasn't just the physical violation, it was the insidious psychological warfare waged by both Tyler and Monica. Tyler's control extended beyond the nightly intrusions. He controlled our finances, our daily routines, even our friendships. Monica had slowly, subtly detached herself from her old friends, even from Nancy, a kind woman who used to visit regularly, bringing me small gifts and always making me laugh. "Nancy asks too many questions, Margaret," Monica had said once, her voice hushed, as if the walls themselves had ears. "She doesn't understand our life." This isolation was a deliberate strategy, a way to ensure there were no outside witnesses, no one to whom I could confide, no one to disrupt their carefully constructed world of secrecy. The house became a cage, and Monica held the key, choosing to keep it locked. This was the deeper betrayal, the active choice to prioritize a man who hurt her child over the child herself. The phrase, "you don't treat your mother like this," often echoed in my mind, a cruel twist on the cultural expression. Because I wasn't treating her badly, she was allowing me to be treated horrendously, and the other expression, "I raised you better," was equally hollow. Monica certainly hadn't raised me better. She had raised me in a climate of fear, silence, and complicity. She had taught me, through her actions, that my voice didn't matter, that my safety was secondary, that a woman's survival depended on appeasing a man, no matter the cost. Her silence was a roar, her passivity an active participation. She never directly harmed me in the light of day, but her enabling was a constant wound, festering and refusing to heal. I remember one particular afternoon when Tyler was in a rare good mood. He'd brought Monica a cheap piece of jewelry from a Walmart run, and she was beaming, momentarily transformed. He'd even bought me a small bag of candy. I almost believed for a fleeting second that things could be different. But that night the pillow was back, pressing down, stifling not just my screams but my faint hope. My body was not my own during those years. It was a battleground, a site of continuous injustice. I learned to dissociate, to float above myself, watching the events as if they were happening to someone else, a detached observer of my own torment. This mental escape mechanism was crucial for my survival, but it also cemented a profound disconnect from my own physicality, a feeling that would plague me for years. I carried the shame and the secret like a heavy shroud, believing that if anyone knew, I would be the one to blame, I would be the one outcast. Tyler cultivated this shame. He'd whisper threats, veiled warnings about what would happen if I ever spoke a word. "Your mother would be very sad," he'd say, his voice a low, chilling rumble, "and no one would believe you, little girl." His words were insidious, designed to plant seeds of doubt and fear, to ensure my silence. And Monica, by her continued complicity, reinforced his message. Every time she held that pillow, every time she averted her eyes, she was telling me, without words, that his needs were paramount, that my suffering was something to be contained and hidden. The tension in our home was palpable, a constant hum of unspoken anxieties. It was a toxic environment, where the air itself felt heavy with secrets, and the vibrant colors of childhood were muted to a dull, fearful gray. I was living in a nightmare, and the only way out seemed to be through a complete erasure of myself. As I moved through my elementary school years in Cincinnati, Georgia, the world outside our house became a confusing, often jarring contrast to the grim reality within. School was a temporary reprieve, a place where I could pretend to be like other children. I excelled academically, perhaps as a form of escape, a way to pour my frantic internal monologue into something tangible and controllable. Yet, even there, the shadow followed me. I avoided physical touch, flinching if a classmate accidentally brushed against me. My teachers noticed my quietness, my tendency to withdraw, but attributed it to shyness. No one, not even the most observant educator, suspected the horrific truth. How could they? My mother, Monica, was a master of appearances. She'd attend parent-teacher conferences, her smile wide and seemingly genuine, praising my diligence, discussing my future as if it were a normal bright path, untainted by the darkness she sanctioned. She'd bake cookies, bring them to school events, her perfect homemaker facade impenetrable. She played the part of the concerned, loving mother so convincingly that the dissonance between her public persona and her private actions felt like a constant mockery of my suffering. The betrayal became a multi-layered thing. It wasn't just the act itself, but the constant active concealment. Monica was protecting Tyler, protecting her relationship, protecting her carefully constructed life, at the expense of her child. I remember one time around second grade when Nancy, my mother's old friend, visited unexpectedly. Nancy was warm, with kind eyes and a laugh that actually sounded joyful, unlike Monica's forced giggles around Tyler. She brought me a storybook, and for a few precious minutes, I felt a flicker of what a normal childhood might be like. I almost spoke, the words hovered on my tongue, a desperate plea for help, but then I caught Monica's eye. Her gaze was sharp, a silent warning, a flicker of coldness that instantly extinguished my fragile courage. The message was clear: do not speak, do not disrupt this fragile peace. The injustice of being silenced by the very person who should advocate for you was a crushing weight. The fear of reprisal, of making things worse, was always present. Tyler had subtle ways of punishing me if he felt I had been difficult, a deprivation of food, being sent to my room for hours, an icy glare that could make my blood run cold. These smaller cruelties reinforced the larger terror, cementing my silence. My internal monologue became a fortress, a secret world where I processed the trauma. I would fantasize about escape, about a day when I would be old enough to leave, to simply walk away and never look back. I'd spend hours drawing in my room, creating vibrant, fantastical worlds where I was strong, fearless, and utterly untouchable. These drawings were my form of planning, an unconscious rehearsal for a future where I controlled my own destiny. The physical act of surviving those nights became a routine, a grim choreography of endurance. I learned to control my breathing, to stifle every instinct to scream, to make my body as lifeless as possible. It was a strange kind of meditation, forcing my mind to detach, to drift somewhere far away, while my small body endured the injustice. Each morning, I would wake up, the pillow gone, the room seemingly normal, but the echoes of the night lingered, a phantom pressure on my face, a chill in my soul. I would watch Monica, her face devoid of any visible guilt or concern, going about her morning routine, making breakfast, humming a tune. The normalcy was almost as disturbing as the abuse itself. It highlighted the terrifying reality that for her, this was acceptable, a part of her daily life. The concept of home became warped. It wasn't a sanctuary, it was a battleground, a place of constant vigilance and quiet suffering. I envied other children who spoke casually of their parents, of family dinners, of bedtime stories. For me, bedtime was synonymous with dread. My only comfort was the thought that one day, this would end. One day, I would be free. This nascent desire for freedom, this quiet, desperate hope, was the first seed of empowerment. It was a tiny flicker in the overwhelming darkness, but it was there, a promise whispered by my subconscious. You will survive this. You will escape. And one day, you will speak. The path to that day felt impossibly long, stretching out into an uncertain future. But the thought of it, however distant, was what kept me going, what allowed me to endure the unendurable, to navigate the betrayal and injustice of a childhood stolen. I knew, even then, that this silent suffering could not be my whole story. There had to be more. There would be more. As I entered my teenage years, the abuse didn't cease, but it shifted, becoming less frequent, less overtly physical, replaced by an even more insidious psychological torment. Tyler's presence was still a suffocating blanket over our lives in Cincinnati, Georgia. He no longer shared my mother's bedroom. He had taken over the den, turning it into his personal domain, a place of loud television, stale beer, and the constant smell of his cigarettes. The nightly invasions into my room became rarer, but the threat remained, a sword of Damocles hanging over my head. My mother, Monica, seemed to become even more entrenched in her denial, her complicity now a hardened shell of indifference. She would ignore my increasingly desperate looks, my attempts to subtly convey my misery. If I ever tried to allude to the past, even with the vaguest hint, she would shut me down immediately. "Don't be dramatic, Margaret," she'd say, her voice brittle. "You imagine things." Or, "That's in the past. We don't talk about unpleasant things." Her dismissiveness was another form of betrayal, a continuous gaslighting that made me question my own memories, my own sanity. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. Not only was I living with the perpetrator, but my own mother refused to acknowledge the harm, let alone protect me. My internal monologue was a maelstrom of anger, confusion, and despair. Why won't she see? Why won't she help? Does she even love me? These questions gnawed at me, day in and day out. I started to understand that her inability to confront Tyler stemmed from her own weakness, her own desperate need for his approval, his financial support, his presence, however toxic. She was trapped too, in her own way, but unlike me, she had the power to choose, and she consistently chose him. This realization, though painful, also brought a nascent understanding of her limitations, and by extension, a quiet resolve in me to be different. I promised myself I would never be so weak, so beholden to another, that I would sacrifice my own child's well-being for a false sense of security. My focus shifted from simple survival to active planning for escape. High school became my sanctuary. I poured myself into my studies, seeing education as my only ticket out. I devoured books, losing myself in stories of resilience and courage. The library became my second home, a place of quiet refuge where I could breathe freely. I started working part-time at a local grocery store, a Kroger, not Walmart as per the default, but a common Georgia chain, and I feel this provides more specific detail consistent with the setting, saving every penny. My goal was clear: save enough money to leave, to go to college far away, to never look back. I researched scholarships, applied to universities out of state, anything to put distance between myself and that house, that family, that suffocating secret. I began to forge a tentative friendship with Nancy, the old family friend, who had recently reconnected with Monica, though their relationship was still somewhat strained. Nancy was still kind, still genuinely interested in my life. She sensed my unspoken anxieties, though she never overtly questioned them. She would talk about college, about opportunities, painting a picture of a world beyond Georgia that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. She unknowingly fed my dreams, nurturing the tiny seed of hope within me. The tension building was subtle, but constant. Tyler, sensing my growing independence, my increasing withdrawal, would become more irritable, more controlling. He'd criticize my clothes, my friends, my choice of books. "You're getting too big for your britches, Margaret," he'd sneer, a thinly veiled threat in his voice. Monica would often side with him, offering weak admonishments. "He's just trying to help, dear. He cares about you." Her words were like a fresh stab wound. How could she twist his cruelty into care? My heart ached with the longing for a real mother, one who would protect me, comfort me, believe me, but that mother didn't exist in my reality. The injustice of her inaction, her complicity, fueled my determination to break free. I counted down the days until graduation, each passing week bringing me closer to liberation. My escape plan was my only true companion, my internal monologue, a continuous loop of affirmations. "You are strong. You will get out. You will be free." The thought of a future, untainted by Tyler and Monica's darkness, became my guiding star, a beacon in the oppressive night. The quiet desperation had transformed into a fierce, unwavering resolve. I was preparing to fight for my life, not with screams, but with silence, and then with definitive action. The day I left for college felt less like a departure and more like an escape. I had managed to secure a scholarship to a university, several states away, a carefully chosen distance that felt like a lifetime away from Cincinnati, Georgia. My savings from the Kroger job, meager as they were, covered the remaining costs. I packed a single suitcase, feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and profound sadness. My internal monologue was a whirlwind of emotions: relief, dread, a sense of guilt for leaving Monica, yet an overwhelming need for self-preservation. Monica, my mother, stood by the car, her face unreadable. She hugged me briefly, a perfunctory squeeze that offered no warmth. "You be good, Margaret," she mumbled, her eyes already drifting towards Tyler, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed, observing the scene with a smug, knowing look. He said nothing, but his gaze felt like a heavy weight, an unspoken warning that my freedom was an illusion. I knew then that the physical betrayal had ended, but the emotional scars, the psychological chains, would travel with me. The first few months at college were a blur of new experiences, new faces, and a desperate attempt to create a normal life. The physical distance from Tyler was a relief, so profound it felt like learning to breathe again. I still flinched at unexpected touches, still struggled with trust, still felt a deep sense of injustice whenever I thought about my childhood. My internal monologue was a constant battle against the haunting memories. I tried to suppress them, to bury them beneath layers of academic work and social engagements. I dated, attempting to forge healthy relationships, but the deep-seated issues around intimacy and trust made it incredibly difficult. I would pull away, build walls, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of being betrayed again. The shame of my past clung to me like a second skin, a secret I guarded fiercely. I never spoke of Tyler, never spoke of Monica's complicity. The fear of not being believed, of being judged, was too overwhelming. I maintained infrequent superficial contact with Monica. Our phone calls were brief, filled with polite banalities, carefully avoiding any topic that might dredge up the past. She never asked about my well-being, never offered an apology, never acknowledged the gaping wound she had helped create. Her continued silence was its own form of betrayal, a constant reminder of her choice. Years passed. I graduated, found a good job in a city far from Georgia, built a career, and slowly, painstakingly, constructed a semblance of a normal adult life. But the trauma remained, a quiet hum beneath the surface. It manifested in unexpected ways, anxiety attacks that would grip me without warning, an inability to fully commit to relationships, a constant vigilance, a feeling that something terrible was always lurking just around the corner. I avoided going home, inventing excuses, unable to face the place that held so many dark memories. The thought of seeing Tyler, or even Monica, filled me with dread. The injustice of their unpunished actions festered. I often found myself wondering if they ever thought about what they had done, if they ever felt a flicker of remorse. My internal monologue would cycle through scenarios, imagining what it would be like to confront them, to scream the truth, to demand an explanation, an apology. But the fear, the ingrained silence, always won out. I was still operating under the rule of the pillow. It was during a particularly difficult period in my mid-20s, struggling with a broken relationship that had crumbled under the weight of my unaddressed trauma, that I finally sought professional help. A therapist, a kind and patient woman named Dr. Evelyn Carter, specializing in trauma recovery, slowly, gently, helped me unpack the layers of my past. It was a painful, agonizing process, peeling back the protective scar tissue I had built around my heart. Talking about it, saying the words out loud for the first time, felt like tearing open old wounds, but it was also liberating. Dr. Carter helped me understand that the betrayal was not my fault, that the injustice was perpetrated against me, not by me. She helped me reclaim my narrative, to see myself not as a damaged victim, but as a resilient survivor. This was the first true step towards quiet empowerment, a realization that the power to heal lay within me, not with my abusers. The path was long, arduous, and filled with tears, but for the first time, I felt a genuine sense of hope, a belief that I could, and would, find my voice. The old fear began to recede, replaced by a growing anger, a righteous indignation that demanded something more than just silent endurance. The decision to finally confront my past was not sudden, but a gradual, deliberate planning forged in the crucible of therapy. Dr. Carter encouraged me to explore what justice truly meant to me. Was it legal action? Was it a spoken confrontation? Was it simply owning my truth? For years, the idea of facing Tyler and Monica had filled me with terror, but as I healed, that terror began to transmute into a fierce, righteous anger. The injustice had festered for too long, a poison in my soul. I needed to excise it, not just for myself, but for the ghost of that little girl who was silenced under a pillow. My internal monologue shifted from self-blame and fear to a steely resolve. They will hear me. They will know what they did. I will no longer be silent. The catalyst for direct confrontation came during a rare visit to Nancy, my mother's old friend, who had remained a distant yet steady presence in my life. I hadn't seen her in years, but a strange impulse, driven by my therapy, led me to reach out. She lived in a quaint small town not far from Cincinnati, Georgia. Over coffee and the smell of fresh baked goods, I found myself, hesitantly at first, then with a torrent of words, recounting fragments of my childhood. I didn't explicitly name Tyler or Monica's role, but I spoke of the feeling of being trapped, the fear, the suffocating silence. Nancy, older now, her face etched with wisdom and kindness, listened patiently. When I finally dared to speak of the bad man and the pillow, her eyes widened, filling with a profound sadness and understanding. "Oh, Margaret," she whispered, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I always suspected something. Monica, she changed so much when he came around. She was so withdrawn, so defensive." Her words, far from dismissive, were validating. Someone believed me. That moment was transformative. It dissolved years of accumulated shame and doubt. It was the crack in the dam, allowing a flood of determination to pour through. My planning then became more concrete. I decided that confronting Tyler directly was not my primary goal. He was a narcissist, incapable of true remorse or accountability. My poetic justice for him would be through the consequences of my truth, not his reaction to it. My focus, however, shifted squarely to Monica. She was the one who had betrayed me most intimately, most actively. She was the one who could offer an explanation, or at least be forced to face her complicity. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I anticipated denial, anger, perhaps even further betrayal as she defended herself. But I was ready. Dr. Carter had equipped me with coping mechanisms, strategies for staying grounded, for protecting my emotional well-being during such a volatile encounter. I wrote down key points I wanted to make, phrases I needed to say. This wasn't about demanding an apology. It was about stating my truth, unequivocally. It was about severing the last, lingering threads of their control over my life, my narrative. The choice of setting for this confrontation was crucial. It wouldn't be in my childhood home, where their power felt absolute. It would be on neutral ground. I decided on a coffee shop in a neighboring town, a busy public place where her reactions might be tempered by the presence of others. I sent her a short, direct message. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important from my childhood. Can you meet me next Saturday at 10 a.m. at the Bluebird Cafe?" There was no room for evasion, no ambiguity. The message itself was an act of defiance, a quiet declaration of my renewed strength. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with a nervous anticipation that buzzed beneath my skin. My internal monologue was a constant rehearsal, a fortification of my resolve. I felt a profound sense of purpose, a stark contrast to the small, silenced child I once was. The injustice would no longer remain unspoken. The betrayal would no longer be hidden. The planning was complete. The confrontation was imminent. And I, Margaret, was ready to finally reclaim my voice, regardless of the outcome. The day of the confrontation dawned gray and overcast, much like the memory it sought to address. My stomach churned with a mixture of dread and resolute purpose. I had dressed simply, in clothes that made me feel strong and capable, not like the vulnerable child I once was. The Bluebird Cafe, in that neighboring town, just outside Cincinnati, Georgia, was bustling, the aroma of coffee and pastries filling the air, providing a stark, almost absurd contrast to the heavy conversation I was about to initiate. I arrived early, chose a table in a somewhat secluded corner, and waited. My internal monologue was a continuous loop of affirmations. "You are strong. You have a right to your truth. You are not responsible for her reaction." Every minute felt like an hour. Then I saw her. Monica, my mother, walked in, her usual composed demeanor intact. She scanned the room, spotted me, and offered a tight, polite smile, the kind she reserved for casual acquaintances. She wore a neat cardigan, and her hair was perfectly coiffed. She looked, to the casual observer, like any ordinary woman, a doting mother perhaps. It was a mask I knew intimately. She sat down, her movements stiff, avoiding my direct gaze. "Margaret," she began, her voice brittle. "What is so important?" "I have errands to run." Her immediate defensiveness was a clear signal. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh coffee momentarily grounding me. "Mom," I started, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need to talk about Tyler." And about what happened when I was a child, when you held the pillow over my face. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Her face went utterly blank. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin ashen. Her eyes, which had been darting around the room, fixed on me, wide with a mixture of shock and sheer panic. "Margaret, what are you talking about?" she hissed, her voice barely a whisper, a desperate attempt to regain control. That's ridiculous. You're imagining things. You always had such a vivid imagination." It was the same dismissive tactic, the familiar betrayal of her denial. But this time, I was ready. "No, Mom," I countered, my voice firm. "I'm not imagining it. I remember it clearly. Every detail. His touch, the pillow, your hands, your silence." I watched her, searching for any flicker of remorse, any sign of acknowledgement. There was none, only a hardening around her mouth, a tightening of her jaw. "I don't know why you're dredging up such unpleasant fantasies," she said, her voice rising slightly, attracting a glance from a nearby couple. "You don't treat your mother like this, after everything I've done for you." The classic deflection, designed to make me feel guilty, to shift the blame, but the emotional blackmail no longer worked. "What have you done for me, Mom?" I asked, my voice laced with a cold anger I hadn't known I possessed. "You enabled him. You allowed it. You protected him over your own child. That's not being a mother. That's betrayal." Her eyes flashed. "You think it was easy for me?" she snapped, leaning forward, her voice a furious whisper. "He was providing for us. He was complicated. I had to keep him happy." Her words, a confession of her own fear and weakness, offered no solace. They only solidified the scale of her injustice. "So your happiness, his comfort, was more important than my safety?" I pressed, refusing to let her off the hook. "My childhood was stolen, Mom. My innocence was destroyed. And you were there. You were complicit." She erupted then, not with tears, but with a torrent of furious accusations. "I raised you better than to make up such disgusting lies. How dare you accuse me?" She denied everything, twisted the past, painted herself as a victim of circumstance, of Tyler's difficult nature, of her own supposed helplessness. She even tried to invoke the "I raised you better" line, completely unaware of the bitter irony. It was a chilling performance, devoid of any genuine emotion, confirming her deep-seated denial and inability to take responsibility. My internal monologue observed her dispassionately. This is who she is. This is her truth, and it has nothing to do with me anymore. The confrontation was not bringing me the apology I had once craved, but it was bringing something far more valuable: clarity. I saw her for exactly who she was, without the fog of hope or expectation. The weight of the unspoken secret was lifting, not because she acknowledged it, but because I had finally spoken it. The power was shifting. The confrontation concluded not with resolution, but with a stark, painful clarity. Monica, my mother, stormed out of the Bluebird Cafe, leaving her untouched coffee and a bill for me to pay. Her last words were a venomous hiss: "I have no daughter." It was a cruel cut, designed to wound, to inflict a final betrayal. But strangely, it didn't sting as deeply as it once would have. It was merely the confirmation of a reality I had lived with for decades. My internal monologue was calm, almost detached. "She cannot hurt you anymore. Her words are empty. Her power over you is gone." The confrontation hadn't brought the tears or the confession I had once fantasized about, but it had brought something more profound: liberation. The injustice of her silence, of her complicity, was no longer a burden I carried. I had laid it at her feet, and she had chosen to walk away from it, confirming her own spiritual bankruptcy. The poetic justice was not in her repentance, but in the truth being spoken, and in my subsequent freedom from its hidden weight. I didn't pursue legal action against Tyler. Dr. Carter and I had discussed it extensively. The statute of limitations in Georgia, the difficulty of proving such a long-ago crime without a direct confession, the emotional toll of a trial, it all weighed heavily. More importantly, my desire for justice had evolved. It wasn't about putting Tyler in a physical prison. It was about freeing myself from the emotional one he and Monica had built. My poetic justice was the active reclaiming of my narrative, my voice, and my peace. Tyler, as far as I knew, continued his unremarkable life. He moved around, never settling, never truly thriving. He was a man defined by his inner emptiness, by his need to control and consume. His life, in its own way, was a consequence. Monica eventually moved out of the old house in Cincinnati, Georgia. After Tyler finally left her for good, she ended up living a solitary life, isolated by her own choices, by the bitterness she carried. I never saw her again. She never reached out, and I never initiated contact. The silence between us, once a terrifying symbol of my oppression, now felt like a peaceful, chosen boundary. My path to healing was a long, arduous journey, but it was also a journey of immense quiet empowerment. I continued with therapy for many years, slowly rebuilding my sense of self, learning to trust, to form healthy attachments. I learned to distinguish between healthy emotional expression and the toxic silence I had been forced to adopt. I found meaningful work where I could advocate for others, becoming a voice for those who felt unheard. This felt like a profound form of poetic justice, turning my own suffering into a source of strength and empathy for others. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, dedicating my time to helping survivors of domestic violence and abuse. Listening to their stories, seeing their resilience, reinforced my own strength. I learned that empowerment wasn't about revenge, but about rebuilding, about finding purpose in the pain, and about living a life defined by my choices, not by my trauma. Years later, I did something I never thought I would do. I visited the old house in Cincinnati, Georgia. It was a different family living there now, their children playing happily in the yard. The house looked smaller, less menacing than it did in my memories. Standing there, on the street where so much injustice had occurred, I felt no pain, no fear, only a quiet calm. The house was just a house. The memories, once suffocating, were now simply facts of my past, acknowledged but no longer defining. The betrayal I had endured had shaped me, but it did not break me. It made me stronger, more compassionate, more determined to live authentically. My reflective epilogue is one of profound peace. The little girl who was silenced under a pillow, whose screams were muffled by her own mother, found her voice. She built a life of meaning, surrounded by people who loved and respected her, people who would never betray her trust. The fear is gone, the shame is gone. All that remains is the strength, the resilience, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I survived, I healed, and I reclaimed every part of myself that they tried to take. The poetic justice was not in their suffering, but in my thriving. I am Margaret, I am a survivor, and I am, finally, free.